All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're jumping deep into a really powerful prophecy from the book of Isaiah, chapter 11. We're going to focus specifically on a fascinating interpretation of verses 10 through 16, one that connects this ancient writing to events you might recognize from modern history. We'll be using our source material to decode the symbols and see how it all comes together. So, here's our roadmap. First, we'll tackle this idea of an end sign for the people. Then, we'll get into what the source calls the Second Great Gathering. After that, we'll explore a predicted reconciliation, link it all up to modern history, and finish with the amazing promise of a highway for the remnant.
So let's kick things off with verse 10. This is where Isaiah sets the stage and introduces a key figure, describing them with this really interesting phrase, a root of Jesse. So you hear that, and you're probably thinking, a root of Jesse? An ensign? What are we talking about here? These two ideas are the absolute foundation for the rest of the prophecy, so let's unpack them.
This is where our source material gets very specific. It doesn't interpret this root of Jesse as just some vague metaphor. No, it points to this being an actual person. According to this text, the root of Jesse is a real descendant of, Jesse, who was an important ancient Israelite leader. This individual is said to hold some serious spiritual authority, what's called priesthood keys, and their whole mission is to gather people in what the text calls the last days. And that brings us to the word ensign. Basically, this person, this root of Jesse, becomes a living, breathing rallying point. They're like a standard that's raised up, and the prophecy says that people from all nations will be drawn to it, sparking this huge worldwide gathering. Okay, so moving on to verses 11 and 12, the prophecy zooms out a bit. It takes this idea of a gathering and gives it a very specific spot in the timeline of history. Did you catch that key phrase right there? The second time. This is a huge clue. The source really emphasizes that Isaiah isn't just talking about a repeat of the first great gathering, like the Exodus from Egypt. He's pointing to a totally new event in the future. So the big question is, of course, when is that day? If this is the second time, when does the source suggest this is all supposed to happen? And here's where it gets really specific. The source draws a direct line from this ancient prophecy right to the 20th century. It suggests that the chaos and upheaval of the world wars actually set the stage for this to be fulfilled, zeroing in on 1947 as a major starting point for this modern gathering. And here's a fascinating little detail our source points out, hidden in the original Hebrew. The words used for outcasts and dispersed in verse 12 are actually gender-specific. One refers to men, the other to women, which implies that this restoration was always meant to include everyone. Pretty cool, right? Now, in verse 13, the prophecy shifts gears. It moves from the logistics of a physical gathering to the healing of a really old, deep-seated conflict. So, this verse is talking about a major family feud, basically. It's referring to the centuries-long rivalry between the northern kingdom of Israel, often symbolized by the tribe of Ephraim, and the southern kingdom of Judah. Isaiah is predicting a time when that animosity finally ends. And this isn't just a minor point. The source presents this reconciliation as an absolutely critical step. Before the people can be truly gathered and unified, this internal wound has to be healed. Okay, this next section is where things get really wild. In verses 14 and 15, our source makes some of its most direct connections between Isaiah's words and major geopolitical events from the 20th century. I mean, listen to that language. Fly upon the shoulders, spoil them of the east. It's so active, so militaristic. According to this interpretation, Isaiah isn't just using poetry here. He's describing literal military and political actions. Let's trace this out on the timeline. The source connects that first phrase, fly upon the shoulders of the Philistines toward the west, to the events around the UN's 1947 partition plan and the 1948 war that followed. Then, it interprets the next part, spoil them of the east, as a direct reference to Israel gaining control of places like Jerusalem and the Golan Heights during the 1967 Six-Day War. The source keeps decoding the geography in verse 15. What Isaiah calls the tongue of the Egyptian sea is interpreted as the Gulf of Suez, and the river, that's identified as the Nile. Suddenly, these ancient phrases start to look like a modern map. And finally, this entire section of prophecy concludes in verse 16 with this incredibly powerful and hopeful image, a clear, open road for the people to return.
So the promise is for a highway, right? A clear path. But the most crucial part is that last line, where it says it will be like as it was to Israel when they came out of Egypt. That's a direct callback to one of the biggest events in their entire history, the Exodus.
You just can't overstate the importance of that comparison. By bringing up the Exodus and the parting of the Red Sea, the prophecy is suggesting that this final gathering won't be some simple migration. It's meant to be seen as a miraculous, divinely guided event on that same epic scale. And this hope for a massive, divinely assisted return isn't some new idea. Check out this quote from our source material, written way back in 1841. More than 100 years before the events of 1948, people who believed in this interpretation were already praying for its fulfillment, using the very same imagery as Isaiah.
And that leaves us with a final question to chew on. When we explore interpretations like this that connect ancient scriptures to modern history, how does that change the way we see these texts? It really invites us to view them not just as historical artifacts, but as living narratives that people continue to find deep, personal meaning in today. Thanks for joining this explainer.